A Union Pacific train like this one, on its normal route, ran over 2 teens and changed their families' lives forever. It was August 23, 1987, 25 years ago today. The time around 4 a.m. at this set of railroad tracks near Alexander. Train engineers say they saw the teens stretched over the tracks, a rifle nearby. They tried to stop, but couldn't. The train hit 17-year-old Kevin Ives and 16-year-old Don Henry, dismembering their bodies. The state medical examiner at the time, Dr. Fahmy Malik, ruled the teens smoked 20 marijuana joints, then fell asleep on the tracks. He listed their deaths as suicide.
Our sons are not here to protect themselves. If they were here, they could tell us what happened. They're not here.
The boys' parents questioned the suicide ruling. They petitioned the court and received permission for a second opinion.
I'm going to grant your petition and do grant your petition for exhumation.
Saline County picked Dr. Joseph Burton, a leading medical examiner from Georgia, to perform the second autopsy. In April 1988, crews exhumed the bodies and Burton began tests.
Injury patterns, any evidence?
Scientific evidence revealed they had not smoked enough pot to be unconscious, and they possibly died before the train hit them. In his words, the deaths are, quote, not accidental. Burton says Henry had a stab wound and not related to anything the train did to this boy. As for Ives, it appears someone hit him in the head with the butt of his own gun. His autopsy confirmed what the victim's family suspected all along. They had been murdered. Next, Saline County formed this grand jury to investigate, and Dan Harmon, soon to become the county's special prosecutor, took control of the investigation.
There is no doubt in my mind that it was a homicide, and there's no doubt in the grand jury's mind.
In late 1988, the grand jury changed the suicide ruling to homicide.
Everyone knew it wasn't suicide.
A victory for the boys' families and friends.
That it's a relief to us that it wasn't suicide, that we know someone out there hurt them.
But who covered up their deaths? Many believe it points to a possible drug ring, political corruption, and 2 teens in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Personally, I just want to know who it was and why.
The violent, sudden death of a child.
We've been labeled as crazies who just can't deal with the death of their son.
A family's life shattered.
There's still the cloud that hangs over everything.
A mother reflects on qualities that made her son endearing.
Very tender-hearted. He loved old people. Could relate to them as well as he could kids his age.
It's August 23, 1987. Ives says her son asked to spend the night at a friend's home, 16-year-old Don Henry. Don's father would call the next morning, asking of the boys' whereabouts after letting them go hunting after midnight. Around noon, a second call from Henry.
And he said, "Linda, come quick, they've been shot and tied to the railroad tracks."
It's on this area of track between Alexander and Benton that, according to police, the bodies of the boys were placed some 25 years ago. Ives says, based on evidence and court testimony, she believes she knows what happened that August day in 1987.
I believe there was a drug drop going on there on the tracks that night. I believe there were public officials involved in those drug drops and the security for those drug drops. I believe that Kevin and Don were grabbed and interrogated for information they didn't have.
She says the conductor also saw something peculiar as the train approached.
They were lying in identical positions, covered with a tarp. I think that's why our state and federal officials have no interest in seeing this case solved. I think they're afraid that everything will unravel if this case is solved.
But this mother, 25 years later, continues to search for truth.
You know, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Let them prove me wrong.
Ives and her family have moved on. They've moved to another home. She no longer holds on to Kevin's clothes. They sold his car, but one day hope to have true closure on what really happened that 23rd day of August, 1987.
You know, we want some justice for Kevin and Dawn. You know, we just want some justice.
Anytime you're dealing with a homicide that has any type of drug ties to it, you always run into those problems where you got a lot of different stories.
A train traveling 50 miles an hour. The conductor sees something in the track just ahead. Unable to stop, the train runs over two people covered by a tarp. 17-year-old Kevin Ives and 16-year-old Don Henry dragged nearly a mile. The first autopsy deems it a suicide. Their bodies exhumed 1 year later. The case turns to a homicide.
We have several people that said they were in the woods. We have no one that has said that they were at the scene.
Lieutenant Mike Frost, head of Saline County's Criminal Investigation Division, now leads the investigation.
There are not a whole lot of leads, new leads that come in. I do not have a detective assigned to the case. I'm the one who goes through the case. I've been through the case files and try to follow up on things that I can find in the case file from that time frame.
Lieutenant Frost says the case has been met with numerous challenges. He says the biggest, perhaps, speculation.
It really makes it difficult to get a handle on exactly what happened on the case.
On top of speculation are claims of a government cover-up.
No, there has not been, as long as I have been in the sheriff's office or have been in the criminal investigation division.
Some suggest the boys saw an aircraft drop of money and drugs tied to an alleged drug ring based out of Mena involving government officials.
There's nothing that I can see that has tied Mena to this case. That's not saying that it wasn't.
Lieutenant Frost says witnesses withhold information out of fear for their lives. Key evidence, crucial, like crime scene pictures and the entire grand jury testimony, all missing from the file. Also, he says several potential witnesses are now deceased.
So many of the people who were as witnesses have since passed, and like I said, a lot of people can say a lot of people were murdered, which they may have been. They're all the people who died of natural causes.
But Lieutenant Frost maintains the case is solvable. It just takes finding the right person with the right information.
When I know of one individual that I would love to be able to talk to that has been missing for many years, that very well may be tied into it, but he has never been found.
What I found in the autopsy was evidence of two boys run over by a train, but then I found a pattern injury on the face of Ives, and I found a penetrating stab wound on the back of the other boy. And one of these was at least visible in the autopsy photos Dr. Malik had taken. What was interesting is I asked to see the clothing, and on the shirt that allegedly had been worn by the boy that had the stab wound, there was a defect in the fabric consistent with the stab wound. And there was a rifle found next to the boys. They'd been allegedly deer hunting with a light, and there's a plastic plate on the butt of a lot of rifles. This plastic plate measured a little over 4 inches long and about an inch and a quarter wide. There was an abrasion on the face of the other boy that measured an inch and a quarter long, an inch and a quarter wide, and about the same length as the butt plate on the rifle. So the new autopsy showed that there was a pattern injury on the face of one boy, consistent with where someone might have struck him and knocked him unconscious, and a wound on the back of the other boy, which may have resulted in him being unconscious, and that would explain why they didn't get off the track when the train came. Dr. Malik concluded the boys had been smoking pot, and they were unconscious from smoking pots while they didn't get off the track. But I looked at the levels of marijuana found in their blood, tetrahydrocannabinol. I reviewed these levels with several toxicologists around the country. No single toxicologist or medical examiner that looked at these results with me felt that they would be sufficiently high enough to cause the boys to be unconscious or to be unaware of the horn being blown by the train or the vibration of the train coming down the track. And other than the patterned injury on the face of one boy and the penetrating wound on the back of the other boy, the autopsy findings were much the same as Dr. Malik's. The difference is that I did not conclude that the boys died accidentally or that they necessarily died from just being run over by a train, as Dr. Malik did. I concluded that they died from injuries that included injuries from being run over by a train, but they may have been rendered unconscious or even killed by other injuries prior to being run over by the train.
It's been 25 years since this case happened, since the boys' deaths. Your thoughts after 25 years?
My thoughts are that one day somebody is going to, I hate to use the word stumble, but come upon answers to the questions of what specifically happened to the boys and why it happened to them. Time sometimes it's not an enemy, it's a help. Sooner or later, somebody that knows something is going to slip up and say something that to the wrong person, and it's going to come to, become public information sooner or later.
Do you still keep up with the families? And if they're watching this, what would you want to say to the victims' families?
I lost my son when he was 17, so I know what it's like to lose your son from whatever the reason might be. I would tell them that that they can't let this basically rule their life. They have to go on with their life. If they have other children, they need to take care of them, but not to give up hope that sooner or later a door will open, a light will come on, and they'll know what happened to their sons.
Joining me is Mara Leverett, who wrote the book, The Boys on the Tracks. And thank you again for coming in. What has held the people's interest for 25 years, Mara? Why does this story still resonate in Arkansas?
Craig, I think it's for 4 reasons. Malik, murders, Harmon, and Mina.
Wow.
And I would say that with regard to Malik, that was Fahmy Malik, Dr. Fahmy Malik, who was the head of the state crime lab, who did the autopsies, ruled that the boys had smoked themselves into a marijuana-induced stupor, laid themselves out on the tracks, and been run over by the train. A lot of people, including me, thought that that didn't sound right at the time. The bodies were exhumed. Turned out, no, there were stab wounds, there were blows to the head, that the boys were dead when they were laid down on the track. And there was tons of cocaine flowing into Arkansas. This is 1987. Lots of powder cocaine coming into the state at that time, and nobody was quite sure why. And there was a belief that maybe these boys had witnessed something, or had thought that they were maybe going to participate in something. Nobody knows what went on, but anyway, they died for it. The third thing was that Dan Harmon, the prosecuting attorney down there at the time, who pronounced to everyone, including Linda Ives, don't worry, I'm going to solve these. We're going to hold grand jury investigations. State police are going to be involved. Nothing will be unturned. 25 years later, nothing led anywhere, except that we know now that Dan Harmon himself was ultimately indicted on drug charges and served time in federal prison.
But where does Mina come in?
Mina comes in the background because at the same time, right there in the mid-1980s, we were finding out that the largest cocaine operation, smuggling operation in the country, run by Barry Seal, was headquartered in Mina, Arkansas, at the little airport there. It had been in Louisiana. Federal authorities knew about it, but then he'd moved it to Mina. Arkansas authorities knew about it, but it continued to operate. And we know that something about it we know was, it has been confirmed, was connected to Iran-Contra. So it becomes involved with a lot of big conspiracy theories. And all of this is partly why Linda Ives has been left wondering. Nobody knows just how deep this is. People in Arkansas still want to know about these 2 boys. And as I say in the book, many other deaths that happened in that same area at the same time that went unsolved. These are the kinds of things that I think we all as citizens have a right to know.
Mara, thank you again for coming in. The book, once again, is called The Boys on the Tracks, observance of the 25th anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you.